And I think we need to go deep in the context of listen the people, go to the Gamba, so explore the real situation, the real work. And I think this is the aha, because we change and we starting to doing things different, innovate, because we are aligning with the context. And sometimes we use the prescription. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, in my last company, I used this. So this tool was very helpful and we can implement now, but we don't align this with the context because we don't know the context. We need to spend time in the context. I think this is a super powerful insight today. Go to the Gamba, understand the context.
And whether it is wise, for example, to say yes to things, or should one be a little more cautious? You know, I often think about people who are in whatever profession they're in, that they're wanting to grow their career. And how do you know when to say yes? You know, something might feel really daunting, but how do you actually know when to say yes and to step in, especially if you're afraid of doing it?
If you're not healthy physically, and if you're not healthy mentally, it impacts your ability to do your job. And if it impacts your ability to do the job, it creates a hazard. And that hazard then creates potential problems. And that can be increase in injuries or illnesses. We certainly know that people who are distracted are more prone to injuries. And if somebody's distracted because of something that's going on in their personal life, then that impacts them in the workplace. So that's, I like the phrase total worker health, total worker. You think about the total worker.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Headline Podcast. I am Andreza Araújo, and I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Megan Tranter, and co-host. And if you don't know Headline is a space to good and powerful conversations with special guests that we want to discuss about the future of leadership, culture, and safety. So, Megan, how is Seattle today?
Hi, Andreza. Seattle is beautiful today. Always a surprise up here, but gorgeous. Thanks for asking.
So who did you bring to talk with us today?
Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. Pam Walaski is joining us today. And Pam is the current president of ASSP, the American Society of Safety Professionals. But not for long, Pam, right? Your time is nearly
Correct.
ending?
Yes, June 30th at 11:59 p.m. Central Time. I will no longer be, that'll be my last minute of my presidency, and then I will be succeeded by a very capable woman by the name of Linda Tapp. And she will take on the duties for the next year, and I will be the past president. So, yeah, it's almost done. It's just another week and a half, 2 weeks before we're finished with the term. So it's been wonderful. I've had a great time. I've been very busy, met a lot of members, got a chance to talk to people. The board has done some amazing things to look forward and implement our strategic plan and be very forward ready and forward fit for some of the things that we think are going to be affecting folks that do this for a living. So I'm looking forward to seeing how some of those initiatives begin to be developed and implemented.
You know, Pam, I was thinking about you before the podcast today, and I went back and I actually found your first, what's the word? You know, how you talk as the new president in the Professional Safety Journal, the PSJ. Mm-hmm. And in it, you were talking about sort of your background and how you got into safety. And I don't know if you want to share that with the audience here, because it's a super interesting background, how you even got into safety. And then I would personally love to hear more about your reflections of what it's been like for the last year and, maybe what you hope for the future with ASSP as well.
Sure. So I started my professional career as a social worker. I got a bachelor's degree, and then shortly after I got a master's degree in social work. And I was doing that for about 14 years. And I noticed that there was a pattern where I would take a job and work for an organization, and I didn't really like the way they were doing things. I had complaints. And so I'd get another job. And that happened again, and it happened again. And I think maybe like the fourth time that happened was like a light bulb moment. This is not the right career for me. That's really the problem. It's not the organizations, it's me. And so as a result of that, I decided that I would go back to school and get a different degree. If it had been earlier, this was the mid 90s, and if it had been earlier at the time, I really wanted to be a lawyer. And right then in the mid 90s, law school was 3 years full time or nothing. And I had a home, and I didn't have the luxury of taking 3 years off. So I gave that up and decided to go for a career in environmental science because I liked the science aspect of things. Graduated from that particular degree. Again, I still don't have a degree in safety. I'm still not a safety professional. And I was working for an environmental remediation engineering firm. And one day, one of the principals called me into their office and said, "We'd like you to become our safety officer." And I said, "Why me? I don't know anything about safety." And the person said, "We think you're smart. We think you're a quick learner, and we need somebody to do it." And so it really wasn't, we'd like you to do it if you want to. It was, we'd like you to do it and you will. So I said, okay, I guess that's what I'm going to do now. And that was 30-ish years ago. And it's been an amazing journey. And it's one of those things where I never could have predicted it would happen the way it did, but it ended up being the right thing. So somehow I ended up in the right place at the right time. And 30 years later, I'm incredibly proud and happy to have been in the profession, and it happened. So it's not uncommon. I think many people, in fact, the American Society of Safety Professionals has 36,000-ish members, and more than half of them did not enter occupational safety and health in the traditional way, where they got an undergraduate degree in safety and then became safety professionals. They were something else. And eventually either got a degree or sort of made their way in. So maybe they were a craft person who ended up on the safety committee at their company and just had a real passion for it and just kind of grew that way, or someone like me who switched careers. There's just a lot of different ways, but it is not unusual for people to have not selected safety as their career choice, but ended up in it and ended up very much loving it the way I have. So it's been pretty good. I can't complain.
Building on this, I would like to ask you, with over 30 years of experience in this field, what do you think has changed the most in how occupational safety and health is perceived and practiced within organizations?
Well, in some respects, I'm not sure that we've made a lot of progress in how we're perceived in organizations. I think, interestingly enough, the pandemic elevated us because suddenly our expertise was essential to keeping organizational doors open. But I still hear from a lot of my fellow professionals who feel like they're banging their head against the wall and maybe not being attention paid to. But I do think it's better in the past 30 years. I do think it's better. I don't think we're where we'd like to be. I think there are still some doors that are not open to us. I think there are still some organizations that see us as an afterthought or overhead and don't necessarily see our value. But I do think it's getting better. And I think we as a profession are starting to better understand how we bring value to an organization. And so in some respects, I think that's been the missing piece, that we never really quite grasped the way we have to demonstrate that value in the organization. And I think we're doing a better job at that. I think that has helped in many respects. So that's been my sort of long view of where we were and where we are now. I think we were much more, well, obviously I know we were much more compliance-based 30 years ago. This is the OSHA regulation in this country, of course. This is the OSHA regulation, and this is what we'll do. But I think we've learned that compliance with the regulation doesn't get us the sort of gains and the type of work environment that we're looking for. It doesn't really improve safety as much as we think we need it to. And so I think, at least in the past 10, maybe even 15 years, we've moved away from that compliance model to more of a risk-based model, or a model that focuses on management systems as the way to achieve that sort of continuous improvement. With the foundation of regulations, obviously, we can't afford not to pay attention to them and not to try to comply with them. But I think a lot of organizations are recognizing that it is not going to get them to where they want to be if all they do is focus on how high the guardrail is and whether or not the fire extinguisher is charged and some of those kind of minor nuances of a workplace area. I think you asked about the ASSP folks as well, so I can answer if you want me to.
No, perfect.
So, I mean, I've been a member of ASSP almost since I started in safety. When I made that switch, I was attending a workshop, and I just made the switch. I was just new in the field, and I was attending a workshop, and a gentleman was teaching it. And at the beginning of the workshop, he said, you know, I'm a member of ASSP, and if anybody wants to be a member or become involved, you know, please see me during the break. And I said to him during the break, yeah, I mean, I'm interested. Tell me more about it. So I joined, and he said, I think we have a spot for you on our chapter's activities. And the next thing I know, I'm talking to the president of the chapter, who says, you know, we have a great idea, and we have a person who's in charge of our programs, doing our monthly programs, and they have about 6 more months left in their term. So we'd like to make you the assistant program chair, and you can spend the next 6 months learning. And then when that person is finished, you can take on that role. And I thought, well, that's perfect. I don't have to have all that responsibility off the top. I can learn and grow. And so I accepted. And about 6 weeks later, the president called me and said, I have good news and bad news. And he said, the bad news is that the program chair is no longer able to do that job. He said, but the good news is you're now the program chair. So I went from saying, yeah, I'd like to get involved, to being the chair of the programs for a particular chapter in probably just a couple of months. Wow. But, you know, and that sort of started my career in ASSP, and my activity and my involvement. And, you know, I've said a number of times that saying yes when opportunities were presented to me has really been sort of the way I've been successful or been able to participate. Always looking for an opportunity, or when somebody asks me if I want to do something, taking advantage of those opportunities. And eventually that got me onto the board of directors, and eventually got me to the point where I became the president for this particular year. So it's been an amazing journey, and it's been I say it's been a gift, I think, to be involved in both the profession and our society.
Pam, I just picked up on something you were saying then, which is saying yes to opportunities. And I'd love to go a bit deeper on that and hear your thoughts about that topic, and whether it is wise, for example, to say yes to things, or should one be a little more cautious? You know, I often think about people who are in whatever profession they're in, that they're wanting to grow their career. And how do you know when to say yes? You know, something might feel really daunting, but how do you actually know when to say yes and to step in, especially if you're afraid of doing it?
I don't know that there's a formula for that. I think each person's way of handling those opportunities is very unique. Me personally, I'm a volunteer kind of person. I'm a doer. I'm interested in being involved. I want to be engaged. And so it's easy for me to say yes when somebody presents me with an opportunity. My philosophy is, even if it doesn't work out, even if I fail, and I'm not able to succeed in that particular opportunity, I think most people would agree you learn something from it. And so I'd much rather say yes and maybe not succeed than say no and pass up that opportunity. So I rarely say no, although over the years I've gotten better at being selective. And part of that has to do with sort of that balance in my life around work and career and personal things, and wanting to make sure that I have that kind of time. So sometimes my answer is no, or sometimes my answer is just no, not right now. maybe another time. So I do feel as though saying yes to those opportunities more often than saying no, you really reap the benefits. Sometimes I think about where I'd be right now if I hadn't gone up to that gentleman and said, yes, I'd like to get involved. And when I was called and asked to be the assistant program chair, if I'd have said, no, I really don't. I just want to be a member. I don't know where I would be right now, because that really started a path and a trajectory that kind of continued to grow those opportunities. So I think it's very exponential. You say yes to one opportunity, and then there's another one that's associated with it. So I think it's a personality thing in some respects. That's my take.
Talking about the yes in this direction, I read about your work in mentoring women in the USH professionals. So what is motivate you most in this work?
You know, I have a group of friends. We've been professional colleagues for more than 20 years. And we get together on a regular basis and we stay in touch with each other. And we've had conversations over the years about our careers and how we ended up where we are. And these are all women who have held high-level jobs. Several of them have been presidents of ASSP. And one of the things that we've always said is that what we really needed when we were in that sort of mid-career, maybe we were like 5 to 8 or 5 to 10 years, where we'd kind of gotten that first job under our belt. Maybe we were having our first role as a supervisor or a project manager, and sort of thinking, okay, this is good, but I want more. Where do I go? How do I get to where I want to be, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? And we all said that we never really had a way to figure that out. And we just sort of bumbled our way through and made it. So that sort of got me thinking that what I could do to give back would be to try to create groups of women who would get together. And the idea is that they become their own mentors. They become a group, sort of a peer-to-peer mentoring group. I'm not their mentor. We get together, we meet once a month for 8 months. We explore different themes around career, like balance, like your personal brand, like vulnerability at work, or barriers, or your leadership style. And as we go through each of those sessions, I sort of facilitate, but what I try to do is to get that group to talk and share and become a cohort, so that when we finish the 8 sessions, they go off and continue to stay together. And then I start another group. And so that's been really, really helpful and really, really important to me, because I feel like sometimes when you do a mentoring situation, it's sort of that one-on-one. Absolutely. And when the mentoring's over, right? And so I think this sort of idea is that this group will continue to grow and share and continue to connect with each other. It's a little different than coaching, obviously, but it is sort of that mentoring and that idea that, where are you? Where do you want to be? What are the obstacles to the career path that you see for yourself, and how are you going to get there? So I just literally today finished the 6th group. And I'll be starting my 7th group, hopefully in a couple of months. So it's been very rewarding. I really enjoy it. And we have a private LinkedIn group, and we, use it for different conversations. And once a quarter, I host just sort of an open session where anybody who's participated in the groups can get together, and we just sort of talk and exchange things. And at the ASSP conference, we get together in person, whoever's there. So it's just really sort of been a labor of love, as they say. So I've really enjoyed it. And then I've also done some private one-on-one coaching with other folks as well, but that's not as much of what I do. It's the groups are really where my focus is.
I think this creates a powerful community.
Yes, exactly. And I think that, as I was saying, when I would talk with my friends about this, that was really, we found our own little community by happenstance, because we're all ASSP members and we would run into each other at the conferences and different events, and that's how we kind of formed our own little community. But it was very by happenstance, and so this is a little bit more deliberate way of forming community. among women in the profession. And again, I do it for women in the profession because I'm a woman in the profession. And, certainly we're still a male-dominated profession. And so I think any resources that we can make available to help. There's a woman in Australia, her name is Kirsten Ferguson, and she writes a lot of leadership books. I always remember, yeah, she's great. Yeah, and I always remember one of the things that she said was, this idea that as you climb up the ladder, you turn around and put a ladder behind you for someone to climb up. She said her theory or her way of thinking about it is it's not a ladder, it's a net. You throw this big net out there so that you can bring in that community. And that's always stuck with me as something that I'm trying to do.
Wow, perfect. Thank you. I love it.
It's not lost on me that we've got 3 powerful women in safety here having this conversation today. And what you're describing, the way that you've mentored and supported all these other women, especially you're saying you're up to the 7th now tranche or group that have gone through. I just can imagine how enormously supportive it is for them. Because like you were saying, many of us have experienced this career where it's been difficult sometimes. You wonder, who can I talk to? And then especially the more senior you get, if you're a practicing safety professional and you're climbing the ladder yourself and perhaps you don't want to show vulnerability, then having that place where people can talk and support one another is just so fantastic for them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And again, each group has its own unique personality, if you will, and different people at different stages of their careers and different ideas. But I think what they find by the end of the 8 sessions is that they're more alike than they are different, and that they find that kind of commonality and common ground around. I say this with sincerity and with love. They are all overachievers. And I don't mean that in a negative way. They're all overachievers. They're all people like me who say yes to opportunities, who want to make the most of their career. And so their willingness to join these groups and to pay the fee, sometimes their companies pay the fee, but they pay a fee to join, really demonstrates to me their interest in navigating their career and taking charge of their career. So I think it's really been an interesting ride. It's been about 2.5 years now.
So what is the secret sauce? So to be successful as these leaders, what have you seen, or what did you learn from them? Because I'm sure you've learned a lot as well. They're learning from one another, but you're learning as well. Is there any secret sauce? Is there any magic dust that we can throw around that helps you to be a successful leader?
The magic dust, I think, is to be intentional about your role and your aspirations, and to have a plan. And whether for you and for me, it is a written plan. And many people I know use some sort of a template to create a plan for the year or a plan for the 5 years. But I think that intentionality around this is where I am and this is where I want to be, and here are the steps that I think will get me there. And thinking about it isn't enough, usually. We think about it, but we don't necessarily do it. And then 2 years later, we say, I didn't make any progress. So I've always been one of those people who functions best with a plan. Sometimes it's more detailed than others. And I think that, to me, that's the secret sauce, is that intention, that you make a plan and say, I'm going to do it. Or if a particular part of the plan doesn't work, I'm going to figure out how to go around it or above it or underneath it. If it's a barrier in front of me, I'm going to figure out a way around it. When I started, when I hit my 60s, I started to think about, okay, now what, right? I don't want to give up working. I don't really see myself as retiring, but I don't want this full-time salaried role anymore. What am I going to do? How am I going to change from what I have now to what I want? And I actually, there was a woman that I knew who did career coaching for women in transition. And she and I met for 6 months. one-on-one, and we crafted a plan for how I was going to get to where I was going to be. And I'm happy to say I'm about 6 months away from hitting all the goals of that plan in terms of what I wanted to do. I wanted more control and I wanted more flexibility. And that's pretty much where I've gotten to. But again, if I had just kept saying, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that, I'm not sure where I'd be right now. But now I am where I want to be because I was intentional about it.
Pam, I was thinking about what you say, intentionality, plan, how you connect this with purpose. Do you think this is important also? Do you see this together with intentionality?
Absolutely. I think, and my purpose is, my career is part of my purpose. I mean, I obviously it's not the only part of my life, but I intend, when I'm no longer working or when I'm no longer on this earth, I intend to have left something behind. I mean, that's kind of my purpose, that there's some legacy, if you will. And so part of that's why I've enjoyed writing articles and chapters in books, and why I do these groups, because I kind of, that's my purpose, is to really have a successful career where I've achieved my goals. So intention, planning, and being purposeful about what you do.
Wow.
Pam, do you think you have to be towards the end of your career to think about legacy? What would your advice be perhaps to people who are at the beginning of their career and the way that they could think about legacy and purpose?
That's a good question, because I never thought about it. I mean, I would say literally for the first 10 or 15 years of my career in safety, I really wasn't thinking so much about my legacy. It really wasn't until I hit my mid-50s when I started to think about, legacy. So I think a newer, younger person in this field, I think just really beginning to figure out where your passion is. In safety, there's lots of different industries that you can work in. You can be in construction and manufacturing and government and academia. There's so many different directions, insurance, you name it. And I think those early years of your career are really about trying to figure that part out. What industry do you feel most drawn towards? What types of companies do you feel most interested in working with? And I think that's really where the role of that early career development comes in, before you start to think about what you want to leave behind when you're no longer working.
Talking about legacy, but now I know you speak to safety professionals around the world, but I would like to know and explore with you, what is the key trends do you believe that the professionals, they should pay attention to in preparing to stay ahead in the field? So what is your key messages for the safety professionals looking the trends that we are facing now?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. There's a lot to answer that. I think I'll tie it into the conversation we were having a little while ago about how our focus is not so much on compliance anymore. We've sort of moved into other areas. And I think as a professional, that to me has been another part of my career, is that the profession needs to evolve, just like any other profession. We're no different, no worse, no better. But you need to evolve in terms of how you think about things and how you do things and the methods that you use. And so I think what I've certainly done over the years is I've tried to be, again, intentional about and introspective about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And I have talked a couple of times about another aha moment that I had about 10 years ago. And I started to think about, when I was working with folks and serving as a safety professional, I didn't feel like I was being very successful, and was sort of like, why aren't people doing what they're supposed to do? And I started reading about and hearing about a number of folks who were beginning to talk about these ideas of that we now think of as HOP, and safety differently, and learning teams and learning reviews. And I started doing a deep dive and reading and learning and understanding. And I read a really excellent book by a woman by the name of Rosa Carrillo called The Relationship Factor in Safety Leadership. And it hit me that, and the idea behind it is that we first have to develop relationships with people that are built on trust and respect before we can influence them. And as safety leaders, we've sort of done the opposite. And it was when I read that book that I said, aha, maybe it's not the worker that's the problem. Maybe it's me. And maybe I need to change the way I do things if I want different outcomes. And that sort of started my journey. And I've really spent a lot of time over the past years really understanding and implementing practices that center around HOP and safety differently, around the value of the worker, the role that they play. As Todd Conklin says, the fact that they are resources to be harnessed, not problems to be solved. And when I began to make that shift, I began to see that difference. And so in terms of our profession, I think more and more of us are beginning to really appreciate and understand that our methods need to change if we want different outcomes. And it's been gratifying to participate with other folks in that area. Megan and I were at a really great event a couple of months ago, Safety on the Edge, in California, which really talked a lot about the edge, right? Where are we in terms of our profession, and how are we changing things, and what's the dynamic way that we want our profession to evolve? So I think it's been very important part of my journey the past 10 or 12 years to really rethink some of the things that I learned in my early stages of my career, and understand that they weren't serving me or the people in my organizations. And so I needed to change.
I think usually the professionals, the safety professionals, we see follow some prescriptions. And I think we need to go deep in the context of listen the people, go to the gamba, so explore the real situation, the real work. And I think
right.
This is the aha, because we change and we starting to doing things different, innovate, because we align with the context. And sometimes you use the prescription. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, in my last company, I used this. So this tool was very helpful and we can implement now, but we don't align this with the context because we don't know the context. We need to spend time in the context. I think this is a super powerful insight today. Go to the gamba, understand the context. Wow, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And the bottom line is that relationship that Rosa talks about, that's based upon respect and trust, is really where it starts. And without that, then you're really your success is going to be much more challenging. And so if you start with that, then everything grows from there. That's sort of the perspective I have on it.
Megan, I would like to explore more this question. How we can influence the people to go in this direction? To go to understand, to go deep dive in the context, to go to building trust.
Well, so it really starts with a fundamental belief, I think, in the goodness and the dignity of people that come to work every day. Sidney Dekker talks about that dignity, that essential dignity. Because if we look at a worker, an hourly laborer in a manufacturing facility, and we can't see the dignity behind who they are and what they do, and have start with a respect for them, then so much is lost. And so our influence, as you say, is really based upon that relationship that we have and that fundamental appreciation for that person and who they are. And I've come to believe that we may think we appear respectful and interested in what people have to say, but people know differently if that's really not what we believe. If we're just asking those questions because we think we're supposed to ask those questions, what do you think? And how can we solve this? And okay, well, thank you for your idea. I'm going to go back and do it the way I wanted to do it anyway. I think people really understand that, and they pick up on that. And again, I think this is true in work life and in non-work life, really. I mean, it's just people. It's just interacting with people. And I think when you approach someone with a sincere appreciation and respect for them, they feel it. And if it's not sincere, they feel it. And so when you have that respect and that relationship, then you're much better able to influence that person or to influence the organization, or to work together to figure out how to influence the organization.
And Pam, I'm guessing this goes far beyond the role of a safety professional as well, doesn't it? You know, when we think about how supervisors or someone's immediate supervisor has the biggest impact on an employee's experience at work, what can they do to support everything that you're saying as well? Because it sounds good, you know, it sounds amazing, and it sounds the way that human beings should treat one another. But I'm wondering, what path do we still need to go on as human beings to be able to get there?
Yeah, that's a pretty deep question. You know, I think you do it sort of one person at a time, or one small group of people at a time. I do one of the clients that I work for, I do some client work for them. We do leadership training for operational leaders on safety and developing a safety culture. And part of what we do is we try to help them frame behavior that they see as having meaning and purpose, as opposed to that judgment that we tend to make. And so we go through this sort of scenario. We watch a video, actually, of a gentleman talking on the phone while he's driving. And we go through a series of discussions about why is he doing that? What's wrong with what he's doing? What are the negative consequences of what he's doing? You know, what are the positive consequences of what he's doing? And we get people to flip their observation of behavior in a way that is much more willing to accept that there's a reason why that behavior is occurring, and it makes sense to that person at the time. It may not make sense to us when we look at it. We may think they're not following the rule, they're not wearing the safety glass, whatever it is. But until we really have that conversation with that person to understand what they saw and what they were doing, we'll never be able to figure out how to impact that behavior or to influence that behavior. And so we work with them around, you know, identifying hazardous behaviors and trying to think about the reason why somebody might do that, a positive reason. And then, you know, we practice that. And again, the idea is that as long as we look at someone and we decide why they're doing what they're doing without talking to them and asking them, we'll never make that kind of impact. We'll never see that kind of change, because we're always going to set up that situation where we look at someone and we decide we know that they're not following a rule, and therefore, if they're not following a rule, well, what follows from that? Discipline. And that doesn't serve anybody at the end of the day.
But all this is related a safety culture. So how your view about the safety culture today, the challenges about safety culture implementation. So how you can connect, because you're talking a lot about how you can moving from the compliance basic programs to risk-based management. So, and this is real connect with safety culture. The way of the people understand safety, understand and implement this culture about safety in the practice, in the strategy, in the field. So I love it when the people say culture is how you decide, how you choose, how you do the things. So what are you seeing about this?
I think, I've always appreciated the Bradley curve on safety culture, reactive to interdependent. I think there's really a lot of good stuff there because it gives us a framework for looking at an organization and trying to place them on that framework from reactive to interdependent by looking at how they do things, how they manage issues, the way in which workers are treated, the way in which supervisors act, the role of safety professionals, and trying to really assess all that, because it's only when you can sort of put it into some sort of a framework, again, can you begin to say, we're here, but we want to be here. Well, this is what it looks like where you want to be, and then you can begin to identify the ways in which you can move that forward. So in this particular organization, in this particular client that I work for, they recognize that they're not in that sort of interdependent culture, which is what they strive for. And one of the things that they recognized that was holding them back was the perception of their supervisory folks, either the frontline supervisors all the way up to the directors. They realized that that was the key group that was not necessarily holding them back, but was the key to making those changes. Because those are the people who have the day-to-day ongoing interaction. A safety professional is there for 8 hours. You may have interaction with 6 or 7 people during the day, whereas each of those team folks has a much more significant influence. So moving a culture really means understanding where the lag on the culture is and figuring out how you're going to make that change. Sometimes the lag on the culture is senior leadership. Sometimes the lag on the culture is operational leadership. Sometimes the lag on the culture is safety, the safety department. You just have to figure out where that is and see where you need to begin to make some impact. But it's slow going, I think sometimes organizations want that fixed fast, come in here, teach us how to do it, and we'll say thank you and pay you, and that'll be the end of it. But it isn't. It's a dedicated, deliberate day in and day out until it becomes the way we do things around here, as opposed to the way we used to do things around here.
Perfect.
When I became a parent, I remember someone said this saying to me, and it was something like, the days are long, but the years are short. And
Yeah.
I often think about that in the context of health and safety culture and change over time, that sometimes it's those micro actions, a supervisor perhaps speaking a bit differently to their employees, a senior executive maybe telling a heartfelt story about something that resonates with people, and all of that comes together to change culture.
Absolutely. It is those little things. It's those individual little deliberate acts every day. But people have to understand what it is that they're doing that they could be doing differently. And when they understand that and are willing to make those changes to be, as we've said, intentional about changing, then, it's like a snowball. It really begins to gather and pick up speed. And before you know it, you've seen that shift that you're looking for, that big, huge shift. So, but it is intentional, and you're right about that. The days are long, but the years are much shorter. I have adult children. My children are grown now, so I can appreciate that.
Do you ever wonder whether you're making the impact and have the influence that you're really, really looking for in your corporate career, perhaps if you're an entrepreneur or doing something else? Well, I offer one-on-one coaching services for purpose-driven leaders who are really looking to find some way of increasing their impact and their influence. So if this is something you're interested in, give me a call, send me a DM, and I'd love to talk to you about it.
Hello everyone! If you are studying about safety culture, leadership, risk perception, I would like to recommend my books. They are available in Amazon.com, and each book is an experience to go deep diving in safety culture, and I think will add value in your journey.
You know, one thing I think about is the book that you helped write last year in 2024. I can't remember the exact title. It was around total worker health, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's the Wiley Strategies for Implementing Total Worker Health. It was edited by a woman we've just talked about earlier, Linda Tapp, who will be ASSP's next president. And she had this idea that she wanted to gather people together who had expertise in particular areas about implementing total worker health. And each of us wrote a chapter. There are 14 chapters. I wrote the chapter on using risk assessment techniques to assess worker well-being as opposed to worker safety. But there's one on construction, there's one on transportation, manufacturing, lone workers. Each chapter is a different type of either industry or focus on implementing total worker health. And it really does go beyond, because NIOSH is a copyrighted program, Total Worker Health, but it really does go beyond that a little bit more into worker well-being and how we are now talking about. We talked about sort of that transition and that evolution. That's sort of the evolution that I think we're in right now, which is the understanding that people bring their whole person to the workplace. It's not that you just clock in and do your job and go home. If you're not healthy physically, and if you're not healthy mentally, it impacts your ability to do your job. And if it impacts your ability to do the job, it creates a hazard. And that hazard then creates potential problems, and that can be increase in injuries or illnesses. We certainly know that people who are distracted are more prone to injuries. And if somebody's distracted because of something that's going on in their personal life, then that impacts them in the workplace. So that's, I like the phrase total worker health, total worker. We think about the total worker. And it's good to see that. I've really been enjoying helping companies to implement that and to think about those things. So that book came out in November of 2024. So we've enjoyed it. And I've been doing some conference presentations and workshops on risk assessment for total worker health as a way of implementing it.
And how you see, Pam, the role of the safety professional to helping to building this psychological safety and mental health? How you see the role of this safety professional?
That's a good question, because I think, we used to be safety professionals. Then we became safety and health professionals. Then we became safety, health, and security professionals. Then we became environmental health, safety, and security professionals. And it seems like we're just continuing to add an initial onto our titles and expanding our scope. And so, in my conversations with folks, there's a lot of confusion and in some cases downright worry about being expected to be a therapist and to be able to diagnose people. And there's a lot of concern about that. And I think it's really important to remember that really all we're doing is asking safety professionals to be able to assess the risk and to be open to what they see and to be able to help workers get the references, the resources and things that they need. So we're not asking you to be a clinician. We're not asking you to do therapy. We're just simply asking you to continue to identify the hazards in your workplace that may not necessarily be the traditional hazards from moving machinery or working at heights that we typically have focused our work on. And I think as more and more of us read more and learn more about it, I think we are a little bit more comfortable with the role that we play in that particular area. We are in many workplaces one of the people that are closest to the actual workers, us and sort of the supervisory staff. And so our ability to observe and be aware of what's going on, somebody who is always prompt to work, who suddenly is late 2 or 3 days out of each week, that's a clue. And, that tells us something might be going on that maybe we want to explore and try to see what we can do to help manage that or connect that person to some resources. But the other piece of it is also physical health. And I think we, chronic heart disease and hypertension and diabetes and some of those other chronic health conditions are also a risk for workers. And we have to be aware of that as well, and make sure that our organizations are providing resources for people to manage those chronic conditions that don't have high barriers like high copays or our health insurance that we offer is so expensive that workers can't afford to pay for it as well as they should be. And so they skip preventative care or skip medications or whatever. We have to pay attention to that as well.
I was thinking about competency, how to identify, because we want to build and create an environment with psychological safety, mental health, but how, and we return again in your point about building trust, relationship, because I think, when you're talking about psychological safety, it starts again in relationship. Do you agree with this?
Yes, it does. I do. I absolutely do. And I think as safety professionals, I believe it's our responsibility to create the environment where people feel safe to speak up, to admit mistakes, to ask questions, to feel comfortable not knowing something. Amy Edmonton's book, again, was another one of those books that just, like, wow. Yeah, absolutely. But I think we also have to avoid saying, why don't people have the courage to speak up in this organization? Well, it's not courage that they need. If people aren't speaking up, there's a reason. And if they're uncomfortable in any way, then I think we can take on that role of creating that comfortable space by relationships, by influencing people. But if people aren't comfortable speaking up, it's not their fault. It's not the fault of the worker if they don't feel comfortable speaking up. There's something in the environment that's keeping them from doing that. So I think it's part of our responsibility.
These are the exact conversations that Andreza and I wanted to have when we first started talking about having a podcast, Pam, because health and safety in particular is so complex, and there's a large focus on technical skills and technical competence. Mm-hmm. But actually, we've covered so many topics here today already, and it's so broad and intertwined, if you like, and especially when you start talking about psychological safety on one hand. And then the other part that I see a lot more conversations about most recently, and I'd love your opinion on this, is psychosocial health and safety. So different to psychological safety, but psychosocial health and safety. We're seeing some countries legislating this under their health and safety legislation, which certainly is getting the attention of many companies and a little bit of concern as well, I guess. But do you have thoughts on that topic about psychosocial health and safety?
I do. And again, I think it all ties into what we've been talking about in terms of our role as leaders to help create the environment, to help develop the relationships, to understand what workers are dealing with, to help create that environment. But it's interesting, as you say, obviously our neighbors to the north, as well as some folks in Europe, have created laws. I mean, they've been doing it for years. And I think even Australia and New Zealand probably have something. The likelihood that we'll see something like that here in the United States, I think is really very, very slim. And so it is frustrating because it is often that regulatory framework that drives implementation. There are still far too many organizations that will respond to a regulation, something they have to do by law, and are less inclined to do things that they're not required to do. So it does put us in a more difficult position to try to advocate for that. There's a very good ISO standard out there on psychosocial risk and how to implement it in the context of a management system. It's a very good framework, and you don't even have to have a formal 45,001 management system. You can just take that standard as a standalone document and implement that. So I think it is all part of some of this evolution that we've been talking about in our profession, where we've gotten away from reading the OSHA regulations. And I think, in your early part of your career, mastering the technical part of what you do is very important. But it isn't hard. And by that, I mean, there are resources where you can go and figure it out. I know the dimensions of guardrails up here. It's up here. It's never going away. In the first couple of years of my career, I had to go look it up. And that's fine until you learn that stuff. But then you're ready for the next part. And that's a lot of what we've been talking about here: leadership and psychosocial safety and psychological safety and total worker health. Those are, some people call them soft skills, right? I call them essential non-technical skills, because that's really what they are. In terms of you and your career, they really are essential to your career. You can be a very talented and exceptionally good technician. You can write a fall protection plan and a hearing conservation plan and, a great checklist for an inspection. And you can do that really, really well. But that's a technical level. And if you want to go above that, you really need to begin to learn and develop those types of non-technical essential skills, like those that are associated with leadership. And that's really where you begin to, frankly, have more fun in your career. So that's kind of been my expectation.
And how is it more fun?
Well, I mean, it's more fun in that it's more challenging. It makes you reach beyond yourself and really, be more deliberate and intentional about how you're managing things. If you're being asked to write a hearing conservation plan, hearing conservation program, it's pretty easy. You just go to the OSHA standard and you figure out what it says has to be in there, and you set up how to get your baseline and annual audiograms done, and you make sure you have enough hearing protection. And, that's important. But it's much more challenging to develop leadership skills and create environments where people feel comfortable and learn how to establish relationships with workers and with leaders to influence in your organization. It's more challenging and it's more fun. And I think it's more rewarding, frankly. And I think most people would find it to be more rewarding. I think, after a few years in a career of very technical work, you're like looking for something more. Okay, I know how to do this. Now what? What's the next thing? And I think
Ben,
that's
do you think the success in this essential and no technical competencies is related with personality?
I guess there are probably people. I think there are probably safety professionals who are quite content and happy to be technicians. That they feel comfortable in that role, they feel fulfilled in that role, and they enjoy that role. Not everybody wants to be a supervisor. Not everybody wants to move into a leadership role. And so I think it's important that we recognize that there should be a path for people who have that more passion for technical skills, and not the other kind of non-essential, non-technical skills.
But if you can list now, because we are talking with a specific part of our audience is safety professionals. So if you can list 5 essential and no technicals competencies to develop, what is your opinion about? What's the 5 for you?
Oh boy, let me see. So I think one obviously is the ability to listen.
Listen.
Listening is very important, and understanding. I think the ability to communicate, both orally and in writing. I think the ability to that perception of when you get to know somebody in a relationship, having an ability to understand what's important to them, having that ability to understand that and to pick that up. Because once you know that, then you have a much more success. So that's 3. I think, sort of that emotional maturity is another very important skill. Emotional maturity and emotional IQ, I think, is also important. And I think last but not least is, you need to have some, I guess, is passion a skill? It's more of a trait, I guess, than a skill. But, sort of that desire to do a good job.
Wow, thank you. Wow, good. I super agree with your list. Yes, I think
Thank you.
communication, listen, is the top of my list also. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. How'd I do? I got 5. Megan, what would you add?
Yeah.
I loved all of them as well. And as you were saying them, it made me think about how people might interpret them as being the soft skills, but actually they are the skills, the characteristics, and the traits that make a safety professional really effective and influential in their role, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And especially the last one, passion. When you said that word, I didn't know how to react because I feel it with my heart, that people, especially who stay in safety for a long time and who very much enjoy the profession, must clearly have passion about it because it's not an easy profession, I'm sure you'll agree, to work in sometimes. I remember a former boss that I had once, and he spoke about health and safety being a noble profession. And I wondered what you thought about that one as well.
I think that's a great description. And I think most of the people that I've met over the course of my career, I would say 99% of the people that I've met are passionate, committed, and noble. So I think that those are good words. I think, as you say, people aren't in this profession for glory or, you can make a good living at it. There's no doubt about that. But there are certainly other ways to make a much better living. And some days are just darn hard. You have a situation where maybe somebody gets seriously hurt and, you feel that and that affects you. And, you think about the impact to the worker and their life and their family and the people that care about them. And so sometimes it's just really hard now. And, I'm not suggesting that other jobs are just easy and always fun all the time. Every job has its own challenges. But I think when you think about, we're a helping profession. We're part of the helping professions. Anybody who's in medical care or emergency response, or I would even go so far as to say teachers, that's the profession where we're trying to help people. And that profession really requires a personality that allows you to keep going and to see the good in people and to want to help people make a better life for themselves. And in our case, a better work life for themselves. So I think it is a very noble profession. And I think we should all be proud of ourselves for the hard work that we do every day in and day out.
I have a somewhat contentious question for you. And I know we've been talking for a long time and you're probably thinking, she should have asked this at the beginning. But I'll tell you the reason I thought about it is when you were talking about health and safety of being a helping profession. One of the things I often find is when people think of it like that, it then becomes the type of profession that maybe is not considered at the forefront in terms of, let's say, business continuity or business growth. And instead, people often think about the helping as being picking up the pieces later on. Mm-hmm. I'd love to know what you think about that and whether there is a place for health and safety as a profession to actually be viewed as a really important seat at the table. I reflect back on the COVID days, and thank goodness that's behind us. We're in 2025 right now. But where health and safety was this important seat at the table. And yet for many safety professionals now, I think, what they're telling me anyway, is they feel like we've gone a little bit back to business as usual of what it was before. And many of them yearn or long for those days where they had an influential seat at the table. Tell me, am I being contentious, or what do you think?
No, I don't think you're being contentious at all, and I hear the same thing. It was heady those days when all of a sudden, our input was being solicited, and people were asking for our opinion and following our recommendations. And I agree, and most people would agree with you as well, that we have slid back a little bit since then. I do believe, though, that I hear that we haven't slid as far back as we were. So we've made some progress. Now, obviously, as you said, nobody wants a pandemic to be the reason why our profession becomes important. But we didn't cause the pandemic, and so I don't think it's inappropriate to suggest that we were part of the hero group of that pandemic in terms of helping our organizations get through it, giving them recommendations and helping them understand what they could do, despite the fact that everyday information was different and changing, and we had to stay on top of it. So I think that that's true. But I do think, I think we said this a little bit earlier in our conversation, safety professionals have always, have regularly and commonly complained about not having that seat at the table. I do think we have some role to play in that. I think for many years, we didn't speak the language of the C-suite, and I think in some cases we still don't. We say, well, OSHA says we have to do this. And I think when our senior leaders hear that, their eyes glaze over. They want to hear how what we're recommending aligns to the strategic objectives of the organization, and how what we're recommending helps the organization move forward, protect its assets, grow in value. And I think sometimes we've sort of been, but this is the right thing to do. And I think that argument, while it may be true, is hard for a senior leader, a C-suite leader, whose focus is on keeping the organization open and moving forward and growing, until our messages align with that and are in sync with what that CEO is trying to do. It can become difficult to get our message across. And so I think as we begin to talk more and more about the language of sustainability and materiality and the value that workers bring, I think we can begin to shift that discussion and shift that perspective.
Pam, I would like to explore with you two trends. Last week, I was talking with a HR director, and she mentioned in the conversation, now, in my company, we have 5 generations working together. How you see this trending about this 5 generations working together, the impact with this, and how the competence relationship go to the game. So understand how this works, and we are prepared to face in this. The communication skills that we have is enough. How you see this trend?
I think that it is absolutely true. In many organizations, we have 3, 4, and 5 generations working together. And, I've often heard about, I generally tend to hear the younger generations sort of maligned, for lack of a better word. And I struggle with that, to tell you the truth, because, it wasn't too long ago that we were the younger generations and we were being maligned and we didn't like it. And I feel like in some respects, it's sort of history repeating itself. In my day, when I was a kid, right. And when I catch myself getting ready to say something like that, or when I read somebody saying something like that on a social media platform, my head explodes. Is that we just haven't come very far if that's the way we look at those things. I think it is reasonable to appreciate that different generations have a different perspective of work and career. I know my children do. They're 24 and 26. And their perspective of work and career is much different than mine was at that age. And I think it is, again, back to that relationship of respect and trust. And as long as it's, when in my day, when I was a kid, that's not respectful, that's not trustful. But when we are willing to listen to different generations, what is it that you want? What will make this job be meaningful for you? And how can we work together to make that happen? I think that's a more helpful perspective. And I think that's a more helpful plan of action than talking about how Gen Z just doesn't have any loyalty anymore, and whatever it is that you hear spoken about. It's not going to change. We're going to have multiple generations working because we're living longer, and therefore we're working longer. And so, we're not quitting work at age 60 anymore. Some people are working much longer than that.
And talking about a different trend now, about the AIs. So how you can use the AIs? I would like to listen to you about examples that we are using AIs as safety professionals to help us in our journey in the safety culture transformation. So how you see this?
Yeah, so I don't have a whole tremendous amount of direct experience with folks using AI. I know certain things such as wearables and other kinds of hazard finding technologies are certainly out there. What I do see about AI is a tremendous potential to help us do our job better. But what I also see in when I talk to folks, I see this sort of continuum or edge. On one side are people who are embracing AI and see it as a valuable tool and are interested in learning about it and using it. And on the other end are people who are dismissive of it, in much the way they were dismissive of when we started using automatic teller machines. They're going to replace all the tellers. There's never going to be banks and tellers anymore. And, that was new technology, and that was scary to people. And I think AI, there are some folks that have that same perspective. So that group, I think it's really important that we find a way to help educate them. And you speak of competency, helping them become competent in understanding the technology and what it can do to help them do a better job. It is not going to replace us. It's just simply not going to replace safety professionals. That's just not going to happen. But we need to be aware of and willing to use the technology because it's not going anywhere. It is here. And you got a Roomba, you got one of those automatic vacuum cleaners in your house. That's AI, right? So there's just dozens and dozens of examples of how AI is part of our everyday life. There's no reason why we shouldn't use it to improve safety.
Perfect.
So, Pam, we've covered so many things today, and I feel like you might even be my twin here, believe it or not. Everything you're saying, I'm secretly nodding, going, yeah, that's great. I agree with that. And even with some of our contentious or challenging questions, I love the way that you've given us insight and shared about various points as well. I wanted to ask you something in the spirit of curiosity and learning, because I know that you're a big learner. Has there been anything lately that you've enjoyed learning about? I don't know if it's a book or a podcast or maybe a conversation with someone where you've heard something or learned something new and you thought, oh, I haven't heard that before, or that's a really good point.
Well, one of the folks that I heard speak at the Safety on the Edge event was a gentleman by the name of David Daniels. I don't know if you remember him or not. And he just wrote a book. He actually just published a book, and I'm going to reach and promote it. It's called Psychosocial Hazards Are Real. And we were talking about psychosocial and psychosocial risk. And it's a really excellent book because not only does he give you technical information about psychosocial hazards, what they are and how they impact a worker, but he weaves into the book his own personal story about the impact that psychosocial hazards had on him over the course of his career. And as a Black man he was originally in the firefighting profession and EMTs, And it's a really interesting way where he goes back and forth between a technical topic and then he talks about his own life. And so it's really interesting. And it reminds me, the reason I liked it so much is it reminds me that behind all of these theories that we talk about and all these ways of doing things are people and people who have lives and things that matter to them in their lives, things that create benefit for them and things that create harm for them. And that just kind of helps you remember that what we do is, while it's technical, there are people's lives involved in that. And merging those two together is really what it's all about. So that's the professional thing. The non-professional thing, I'm an angler, and I love fly fishing, and I've been really trying to hone my casting skills on fly fishing. So that's been the other thing I've learned about.
Wow, I never knew that about you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
I would like to say thank you. Was a good and genuine conversation. Was a lot of insights here about leadership, supervisors, or competencies for us as a safety and health professional. So thank you, Pam. It was a pleasure to be here.
It was a lot of fun, and I've really enjoyed it. And you're right. I mean, we've sort of been all over the place with topic and conversations and things, but all of this is stuff that's really important to me. So I appreciate the opportunity to share it.
Thank you, Pam. It's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you, Andreza. See you for the next one.
Yes, thank you for our audience also. And if you don't subscribe, it's an opportunity now, subscribing our channel and continue, because every month we have a good conversation here with a special guest like Pam. So bye.
Bye, everyone.